Welcome back to movementprofessional.com. So this is the next installment of the series, It Hurts When I Do This. Today we're going to touch on a pec strain with movements such as moving the arm out to the side or just even squeezing the shoulder blades, pushing the chest forward. This is a specific response to a question I had from a jiu-jitsu buddy of mine who was talking about having some pain in the pec. He said specifically he's having difficulty even at the top of a breath, pushing the chest forward at the top of a pull-up. So it feels like it's coming off a lot of different things. So we'll touch on each of the possible mechanisms or the possible actions that you can feel the pain with and why that might be once we understand the anatomy of the muscle. So thinking about the pec major muscle, there's two pec muscles. There's a pec major and pec minor. What we're talking about today is the pec major. So generally the attachment points are you have a collarbone and your sternum, and you have attachments to both the collarbone or the clavicle and the sternum. So there's actually two heads of the pec major, the sternal head and the clavicular head, and they both come together and insert on what's called the greater tubercle of this arm bone. So the attachments are important because if we want to know how to either mobilize it or what puts stress on the area, we have to know how to either bring those attachment points closer together or move them farther away. We also want to know how the body's going to compensate to try to move around where we have limitations in shoulder range of motion. So a lot of times we don't think of the pec as a shoulder muscle because it's more on the trunk, but it does cross the shoulder, and that's why doing a lot of bench press, a lot of push-ups can eventually lead to some shoulder problems if you overwork it. So it is a shoulder muscle and it has an effect on the shoulder. So if the shoulder range of motion is limited, it's going to give us more of an opportunity to have strains in the pec because we're not getting as much motion through that area, so pressure can build up, and then before you know it, you have more opportunity to have a strain in the muscle. So when we think about the attachment points and what we're trying to do to get motion and controlled motion to the pec, a major thing to understand is that we want to hold the spaces of the front of the rib cage and then the back of the rib cage between the shoulder blades. We want to basically hold them sacred. We want to keep them open. We don't want to compress them as we're trying to move the shoulder. So one of the most common mistakes when we're trying to rehab a pec strain is we think of it as we've got to stretch it out. And when we try to stretch it out, we think about actually squeezing the shoulder blades together and pushing the chest forward. So you will feel some type of strain in the front of the shoulder, but what we're doing by squeezing the shoulder blades together is we're closing down the back side of the rib cage. So it basically just pushes the whole rib cage forward, pushes the chest forward. A lot of times it also creates a shrugging motion or more activity up higher, and that is going to actually create a little bit more tension, sometimes up in the higher ribs. So that's where Aaron might be getting some of his discomfort with the top of an inhale if he's taking a big breath in, because there's attachments to the pec to the upper ribs. So you're just getting a little bit of strain through there. So what we want to make sure we're doing when we're trying to mobilize the pec safely is we want to think about moving the shoulder into directions such as horizontal abduction, which would be out to the side, and in angles towards overhead. But we want to do that by keeping the front of the rib cage and the back of the rib cage open. So a good way to think of that is we want the lungs to stay full while we move the arms in a more longitudinal direction. So we don't want to really move them too far back. We don't want them to move too far forward. We want to think of it as we're moving the arms out away from each other at different angles while we keep the front and the back open. So I'll demonstrate some exercises of how to think about that, because that could be really confusing because the easiest thing to do is just pull the hands back as far as possible or put your arm on a door and turn, but that's just going to close the backside. And instead of that moving or fixing one of the attachments and elongating or moving the other attachment away, what it does is it just moves the whole rib cage forward. So we're really not moving on any type of stable base. And it often creates more strain than is necessary, and that's why pushing the chest forward or squeezing the shoulder blades together can actually just create more pain as opposed to trying to make it more of a rehab type of thing. All right, so that's going to be the number one concept, is that we got to keep these front and back areas open. And again, I'll demonstrate how to do that. And once we understand that concept of how to keep things open, then we can basically break our interventions down into two separate categories. Categories to mobilize the shoulder, specifically into horizontal abduction out to the side, or some version of horizontal abduction and overhead flexion going towards overhead while we're maintaining those spaces. And then we can also think about creating a little bit of strength to the area, so some controlled stress in a manner that we feel is not creating any type of symptoms. So an exercise that works really well for that is a controlled fly, while we're really trying to think about stabilizing our posture and stabilizing or controlling our breath, as opposed to adding a lot of weight to it. So I'll demonstrate both of those, and then I'll demonstrate different ways to allow us to have some feedback for keeping the front of the ribcage and the back of the ribcage open. So the first exercise we're going to look at, and just an understanding of how to keep the back side of the ribcage between the shoulder blades open, so we're going to use this half roller. So you can use other things. The half roller works the best because it's not too high off the ground and it's stable, so we don't have to have a balancing act to try to stay on it. So our goal here is going to be keep the back of the belt on the roller. The space between the shoulder blades now fits nicely on the roller, so basically both of my shoulder blades are off to one side, and I can feel the roller is basically going down the alley between the shoulder blades, and then I also get the back of my head to stay on the ground here. All right, so before I do anything with the arms, I want to make sure I have this posture set. So I'm going to do a little bit of a tilt of the pelvis so that the back of my belt gets more into the roller, and then I might even feel that that moves the back of the rib cage, or the space between the shoulder blades, more into the roller. And then I have the back of my head, not the top of my head, so I don't want to point up this way, so there can be a little bit of a chin tuck, but for the most part, if the back of the head is just resting there, that's all you need to do. All right, from there, we can maintain that. I'm going to actually try to engage my center, my lower belly. I might even pull my heels back towards the butt to engage the hamstring, so that's just going to keep the energy lower. It's also going to help me stay stabilized into the half roller. Then I can take the arms up to the letter T. So this would be a horizontal abduction motion. And I want to assess, does that create any symptoms? The thought process and the direction in which I want to move my arms is I want to feel like I'm reaching my fingers away from each other. I'm not driving them down into the ground. So there's a thought that, okay, I want to open my chest as much as possible because that's what hurts. So I'm going to try to open it and push my hands into the ground. I want to feel like I'm actually getting lighter on the ground and reaching the hands further away from each other. So there's this longitudinal pull on both sides. And that should give a sense of a stretch moving through from the chest out towards the attachment at the shoulder. And then I could take a breath here. So when I inhale, I want to think about filling my belly, filling my chest. And then I also want to think about filling the space between the shoulder blades, the back of the lung, and feeling that move into the half roller. And then I can exhale. I just want to feel like I'm pulling my belly in, ribs down, but I keep the essence of the reach. All right, and I can do that for several breaths. I can do it for one breath at a time, bring the arms in, and repeat. All right, and then I can explore going up to higher angles, but again, I'm not trying to go necessarily towards the ground. I can use the ground as feedback to see what my range of motion is, but the idea is to feel like my arms are reaching out of the socket while I'm keeping the space in the front here. My sternum is able to stay a little bit elevated, and the space between the shoulder blades is able to stay full and into the roller. I don't want to feel my shoulder blades squeeze on the roller, so that's what we're trying to avoid, and that's what the roller is giving you some feedback. So if I go up a little bit higher, it's a different stretch. The higher the arms go, it tends to create a little bit more of a stretch towards the sternal head of the pec major. That's not necessarily important to know, but what I would look for is where are the symptoms most prominent, and just want to be the most careful there. But oftentimes the more the reach is longitudinal, the less likely you're going to create those strains. The more you try to squeeze the shoulder blades and push the arms to the ground, the more likely you'll get some symptoms. So this would be one of the first exercises that I work with, and you want to be cautious and you want to be curious about where your symptoms are, and you want to try to work around the symptoms, but really try to find the corner of where the symptoms come on so that you really get a profile for your pain. All right, and then another nice exercise here to be more dynamic is you keep the posture and you do a snow angel type motion. The whole time though, you're trying to feel the arms reaching long, not into the ground, while you're maintaining the posture on the roller. Okay, so that would be how we can think about keeping the backside here open. So you can think that this half roller is right between the shoulder blades, and we're not trying to have the shoulder blades come together and squeeze on the roller. So that's the feedback that we use for that. If we're thinking about this front side, we can use a ball, like a foam-like ball like this, as a trigger point ball, and we can just put it a little bit off from the sternum. So I'll look at both sides. I'm going to show my left side here. So I'm going to put the ball on the left side of the sternum. I'm going to have the left leg straight, and I'm going to have the right leg kicked out. And I start this left arm in that horizontal abduction position. So again, I'm going to take a little bit of a pelvic tilt here, which actually makes my belly bridge off the ground. So I have a little bit of abdominal activity, and I have a little bit of hip extension activity through there. From there, I'm going to, again, reach the arm long. And this time I can actually think about turning the thumb up and do a little bit of shoulder external rotation and see how that feels, and then let it relax. While I have the pressure in my chest here, I can also think about, as I'm reaching, inhaling into the ball, filling that side of the lung while I'm reaching and creating that motion of the shoulder. Trying to think about the back side of me, the shoulder blades staying open, and then relax. Squeezing the shoulder blades here would actually make the arm smaller. It would bring the hand closer to the body, where I want to think about keeping that backside open, so I'm trying to reach the hand away from the shoulder. And that's a key distinction there. And then relax. And then you can bring the arm up again into this more overhead position, or this diagonal scaption position. You do the same thing. You try to breathe into the ball, fill up, elongate the arm, and then try to turn the thumb up. And that's going to be stiff on most of us, but that's something worth working on. So it's much better to feel that there's a lack of range of motion than to try to force a stretch into the area of injury. If you find an area of the shoulder that's tight but not painful, those are the best exercises to do, because improving that range of motion will likely give you more ability to work around the area that's creating the strain at the moment. All right, so those would be 2 exercises to work on the shoulder mobility necessary to take a little bit of pressure off the pec major there. Then we can go into, if we want to try to strengthen the area, we could bring this half roller out again. And we'll start with no weight, and then I can show us some light weights how to do this. What we do is we just take the same exercise we were doing before as far as where our posture is on the half roller, but now we're going to go through a chest fly. So I want to still keep my heels dug in, hamstrings, abs are engaged, and then as I would open my hands, I'm thinking about reaching the arms away, and then I'm going to bring it back in. So as I bring the hands back in, I'm using the pec muscle to bring the hands back in, and as I'm opening slowly, I'm doing the eccentric portion of I'm using the pec muscle in an eccentric portion, or the negative. Both are strengthening the area, but I don't need a lot of weight here. Sometimes if the symptom is really sensitive, you don't want to use any weight at all. You just want to use tempo. You want to go slow as you can, really focus on the posture. If that has no pain whatsoever, then you can add some light weights and do the same thing, but make the essence of the exercise maintaining the posture, thinking about keeping the arms long, and not about how much weight you're doing. All right, so hopefully that's helpful. Again, the concepts here are, we want to make sure that we're thinking about holding the front and back of the rib cage sacred. We're trying to keep that area open while we move the arms in this longitudinal fashion. And that will help us work around the symptoms a lot, and also improve the range of motion we need in the shoulder, so that the pec muscle itself isn't taking as much strain. And then we can gradually build the strength in it while we respect the posture. If you have any questions, you go to movementprofessional.com. If you have any specific questions about injuries you might be having, please feel free to reach out, and I'll do a videos right for you. See you next time.